United States asks, which enemy to fight? Senior Al-Qaida leaders are forging deeper relationships with Pakistani militants and often operating from their camps inside the Pakistan border, fueling Obama administration arguments for a shift in the Afghan war strategy that theoretically more narrowly targets the terrorists. How much longer will this take? For 8 years, now going on 9, since the attacks of September 11th, 2001, the United States has focused mostly on Afghanistan's Taliban as an ally of Al-Qaida. But now, however, forced to choose between sending more troops in an intensified counterinsurgency campaign against Afghanistan's Taliban, or largely maintaining troop levels and using more drone strikes to take out Al-Qaida along the border. U.S. officials must first determine which enemy is the greater priority, and that dilemma is complicated by the recent rise of a Pakistani faction of the Taliban that operates in close proximity with Al-Qaida. Even as Al-Qaida has lessened activities with its former Afghan Taliban hosts, according to some administration officials. U.S. officials face a tough or huge challenge in dissecting the structure and leanings of the militant organizations on both sides of the often indiscernible Afghanistan-Pakistan border, and understanding the murky, confusing, and evolving ties to Al-Qaida. With concerns about Pakistani militants growing, a faction inside the Obama administration that includes Vice President Joe Biden is pushing for the United States to concentrate more on Al-Qaida and less on the Afghan Taliban. But the push for that strategy butts up against the long-perceived union between Al-Qaida and the Afghan Taliban, ingrained in America's consciousness since the September 11th attacks and the long ensuing war in Afghanistan. The Afghan Taliban took over Afghanistan in 1996, united in Islamic ideology. They sheltered Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda followers. In the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, the last U.S. administration repeatedly linked Al-Qaida and the Afghan Taliban in rhetoric and policy, pairing them in enemies lists and economic penalties. President Barack Obama and his advisors are debating whether U.S. policy should sever that linkage and target Al-Qaida, which has appeared to have found new allies inside the Pakistani border, ties strengthening, and perhaps this war has been going on way too long now. Over the past 18 months, according to a number of experts, Al-Qaeda leaders have deepened and solidified the relationship with Pakistan's Taliban and other violent homegrown militant groups. According to U.S. officials and experts, Al-Qaeda leaders have provided training and resources to these groups in camps along the border. The stronger ties are also evident, experts say, in suicide bombings and other violent battlefield tactics long known to be associated with Al-Qaida that are showing up more frequently in attacks staged by those Pakistan-based groups. Pakistan's Taliban have unleashed a spree of violence inside the country over the past year, attempting to take over the Swat Valley region before being ousted by Pakistan's military. In recent weeks, the Pakistani Taliban, aided by other militants, have targeted military and government installations and suicide bombings aimed at forcing the government to back off from its recent push into South Waziristan, the border area where many militants are based. But despite those attacks, the offensive began last week. While the Afghan Taliban share many of Al-Qaeda's violent goals, including the defeat of the Kabul government, they are more regionally focused and do not hold the same global jihadist views. Some U.S. military and intelligence officials, however, warn against underestimating the relationship between Al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban. General Stanley McChrystal, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, is arguing for an additional 10,000 to 80,000 troops to mount a counterinsurgency campaign against the Afghan Taliban to stabilize the country and boost Afghan security forces. But rising U.S. casualties, escalating violence, and declining American support for the war have put political pressure on the White House to rethink that strategy. The counter-proposal urged by Joe Biden and others would maintain current troop levels and use special ops forces and targeted unmanned aircraft strikes against Al-Qaeda and other insurgents. Biden and others argue that if the aim is to prevent future terrorist attacks against the United States, then the goal must be to defeat Al-Qaeda. Well, wasn't that the goal all along? Or what has been the goal? One military expert told Congress this past week that any move to defeat Al-Qaeda cannot be separated from efforts to defeat its allies and proxies. The militants are teaming up. The Afghan Taliban may not be planning terrorist attacks against the United States now, although they could be, but the expert said that with continued association with Al-Qaeda, the Afghan Taliban eventually may pursue global jihad. Bruce Hoffman, a counterterrorism expert at Georgetown University and a longtime government advisor, said Al-Qaeda continues to work with the Taliban and other insurgents or militants on both sides of the border, providing resources and training to bolster their fight. He and others argue that to narrowly focus the fight on Al-Qaeda leaders, particularly those targeted by drone strikes inside the Pakistan border, would be to oversimplify a complex enemy and ultimately fail. Well, they may fail anyway, because the bottom line is the Afghanistan war has gone on way too long. It's taking too long. And in the meantime, the occupation, whatever you want to call it, of Afghanistan by NATO troops or American troops is creating more anger, more resentment, and more hatred of the United States also at the same time. This war should have never happened, or at the very least, it should have been concluded a long time ago. How much longer will this war drag on? That is a very good question. And what about the elections of Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan? He's seen, or he's perceived, as a corrupt leader by the Afghanistani people. So they're going to have another election? Anyway, this is a huge problem for the United States. A very complex problem. And there's something much more going on here. And these are more signs of the end times. Transition days. Transition is a process, ongoing, happening daily all around the world. And there are many signs